Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar podcast to review our 5th consecutive weekend of on-track action as IndyCar hit Worldwide Technology Raceway, also known as Gateway, for another frenetic short oval in one of the coolest events of the year. It's always very fast-paced being a short oval. It always comes up with the goods. It's a reliable 8 out of 10 every single year without fail as Gateway, apart from the timing of it, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Stories up and down the field, a slightly surprise battle for the victory, names popping up and towards the front that we wouldn't usually see there. It had a bit of everything, did Gateway, and kind of really rounds off that very busy stretch with kind of a nice feel high moment after the carnage that we always see at Detroit every year.
I think I left this weekend more jet lagged than I was when we made an 8-hour trip over the Atlantic from Indianapolis back home 2 weeks ago, and I didn't move an inch from my basement. So that says what you need to know about the timings of this weekend. I was pretty wiped out on Monday. I think it was about 9 o'clock in the morning by the time I'd actually finished my work and got to bed. I mean, there was still a chunk to go in the race before it even got light with a decent chunk of the race remaining, because, I mean, the sun's rising at like 4:30 at the moment here. So it's a very unique weekend. I don't think it's something I can complain about, though, because actually I quite enjoy it. It's a bit of a story to tell, and ultimately it is worthwhile because, as you say, like, I feel like there was a phase where this race wasn't this good, and in the last few years it's really had an upturn. And, you know, was it as good as last year? I think that's one to debate. I know they made some changes to the package, but it was pretty epic, really. You had a fight to pretty much the finish, really, throughout the race. I'm glad they managed to get it in as well. The rain delays obviously exacerbated the lateness of it, but enjoyed it. It was worth being pretty much destroyed for an entire day afterwards.
And I will apologise as I was slightly late. There's 2 reasons why this is late. One, Archie was at a concert last night, so we couldn't record last night. The other reason is I had an absolute disaster in trying to watch this race. Sunday evening, I had to get up at 8 a.m. on the Monday. So
I was still awake.
You were still awake. So I set my alarm for like 2:30, which was the expected green flag time. I woke up and I was like, we're on lap 55? I could have sworn the start time was at 2:25. It was, but they had moved it back because of the weather delay, which I had no idea about. And then I watched it until we had the first red flag, and I was like, it's halfway through. It's already like 11 p.m. US time. They're just going to call it here. I'm going to bed. I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, well, looks like they didn't red flag it then. And then I've only just had the time to finish watching it because it was obviously a very long broadcast. So I finally got around to watching it. It would be a very good race review if I had watched between lap 55 and 1:30 and guesstimated what happened the rest of it. So fully up to speed now. It's fresh in my mind. So I've got loads to talk about because I watched the race and Archie probably forgotten about it because he's so tired whilst he was watching the race.
I'm recovered now, but like genuinely, this was worse than our trip back from the States. Like, I was genuinely more tired. Like, I was sat at the concert last night, and Jason Isbell was unreal. It was really good. But if ever like there was a moment I yawned, my eyes would start closing. I was like, I had to like properly G myself up not to fall asleep by probably about 8 p.m. But I slept about 4 hours during the day, but it's pretty hard in broad daylight. That my nighttime was the middle of the day.
I mean, I'm not as bad as you, but long-time listeners of the show, well, I say long-time, year-long listeners of the show will know my affinity for the Knicks. NBA Finals, if you didn't know what's going on, and the Knicks are obviously in it, and all the games start at 1:30 a.m. UK time and don't end until 4:30, and I often have work the next day. So it's an interesting time for me where, as of the day of recording, we've played 3 games. We've got potentially 4 left. Hopefully 2 left, but potentially 4. So I'm kind of hoping for it to be over so my sleep schedule can go back to normal. But if we lose, I'm going to be gutted. But that's another podcast story for another day. Let's go back right to what happened at Gateway, where Josef Newgarden secured his 2nd victory of the season and his 6th victory at Worldwide Technology Raceway after a race-long battle with Marcus Ericsson, Rasmussen at points, and kind of reminded everybody why he is the short oval king. Him and Ericsson had the strongest car pretty much throughout the entire night. They always looked like they wanted to beat, and the strategy of the number 2 crew, Newgarden nailed it on pit lane when he needed to and made the decisive overtake when he needed to. And it's been a rough stretch for Newgarden, obviously still walking a little bit wounded from his injury at Indy 500. That was obviously a huge disappointment. Detroit was a very difficult weekend, and last week we were both a little bit, well, how's he going to feel at Gateway? This is going to be a really big test, maybe a little bit of a risk putting him into a high-speed oval, but he looked right at home. There were no signs of such injury, and a very, very impressive classic Josef Newgarden short oval victory.
Yeah, but I mean, we'll get into our predictions at the end. But I initially had Newgarden on my podium. Then I wrote him off because I'd kind of forgotten a little bit about the injury and was just questioning how much it would impact him. Obviously, it's his left foot. So on this occasion, like, it wasn't really that impactful. I know he was asked about it after the race, and he basically said there was no issue. Why was this different? Because Detroit is Detroit, and Detroit's really bumpy. This was a nice smooth oval, so it wasn't particularly impactful. Apart from when he's getting out of the car to celebrate, and he's kind of just perched, just sitting on the side of the car. It was kind of unique, and he's on the podium with a medical boot, so that was quite something. But I must say, like, it is a joy watching Newgarden on these short ovals. That's now 15 of his 34 career wins, which, by the way, 34 wins, that puts him 9th all time, level with Alonso Jr., which is pretty cool. Like, he's hurtling up the standings there. But I mean, the issue Newgarden is facing is he's not winning races on road and street courses. I mean, I think he's won. I figured that was 11 oval races.
It is 11 in a row, but you have to bear in mind there is a bit of an asterisk of St. Pete 24, which he ran one on the road,
but like, there's still been a handful of oval wins since then. And
of course, there's been 5 apparently.
I mean, his last podium on a road and street course was St. Pete at the start of last year. So you've gone a season and a half now since he's got one. I know he finished 4th on the Indy road course this year, which was progress. But obviously, he is absolutely still the benchmark on short ovals. I know we keep mentioning like Rasmussen, who performed really well on Sunday night, Malukas, Daly's obviously been mentioned. I think we missed him this weekend, but Newgarden is obviously still the benchmark. It's 15 wins in his 34 have come on ovals shorter than 1.5 miles. So pretty impressive, and easy to forget that actually last year at Gateway he ended the race upside down, but that was only one of 2 races in his last 7 there that he hasn't won. Both of those he actually finished 25th. So he is absolutely the guy at this track. I know we obviously spoke about the now disappeared Iowa obviously being his home, and I mean, it very much was. Like, he was dominant there too, but Gateway, he is exceptional. Obviously, 5 of his 6 wins he's got there coming in his last 7 visits. So yeah, it's so cool just watching a master at work, and that's what Newgarden is. I mean, he didn't actually lead any laps until past, I think he led 1 lap before the 200 lap mark, but really when it matters, as so often is the case, he gets into that really controlling position, and from there there's no looking back. But apart from the fact he thought Christian Rasmussen was a lapped car when he was fighting him for the lead and didn't quite realise, but ultimately ran away from him anyway, and stamped his authority, you could say, over Marcus Ericsson, who was similarly impressive.
It is a bit weird to think this is Newgarden's 2nd victory of the season, because it really still hasn't felt like he kicked on really from the disappointment last season. Like, you're kind of, it looks like you're half disagree. Okay, but you look at the results and it is still very patchy. Like, oh,
for sure. Like, it's been streaky, but I think, I mean, he had 7 top 10s last year. He's already got 6, and we're only 9 races into the season.
I would say his general performance isn't much better. Like, last year, there were probably several over races that he probably could have won, which, you look at someone like Iowa, his season would have looked a lot different had he won one of those 2 Iowa races last year, is kind of my point here. And it still feels like he's far too inconsistent race to race. Like, he is still the guy on short ovals. We really need to see kind of his form of old and road and street courses. But like Rasmussen in some cases, we'll get onto a little bit later, when you have a driver who is just so skilled at a certain track type, like, obviously this is on a completely different level, but Pato on road courses, or Lundgaard on road courses, for maybe a more comparative example, like, it just makes them such a force, which means it doesn't really matter how they perform everywhere else if you know they're going to get you a solid result week in, week out on a particular track type. Ultimately, we know Newgarden's a driver capable of doing it on every single track type. We just need to see that on a more consistent basis. But, like, as I said, although I don't think performances have improved, his mood seems a lot better than it did 12 months ago. We aren't having these bad luck that he was having race on race. Some of it was his own errors, like we've seen this year, Arlington, Indianapolis, whatever it may be. But I would just like to see this form kind of kick on a little bit more when we go into Road America, Mid-Ohio. Nashville is, of course, going to be one of the favourites because we know he's capable of it. And I want to see Josef Newgarden at his very best, like we saw at Gateway.
I mean, I think this inconsistency has been a thing even before he got into this kind of slump of sorts. Like, I mean, it's kind of he's one of those drivers you'd almost categorize with Rossi, who, since the aero screen, has maybe not delivered what he had done previously on road and street courses. And we've made that point already. Like, that is for sure where he needs to kick on and needs to see more weekends, like we saw on the Indy road course, for instance. I think obviously Penske's package hasn't been tremendous up against the competition, up against your likes of Lundgaard, your likes of Ganassi and Palou in recent years. I know they've been putting a lot of work into obviously improving that. I think they're, to be fair, seem pretty quick on street courses, and there it's maybe a bit of a matter of execution on some occasions. Obviously, Newgarden with the most comical tub-destroying crash in Arlington was still quite something at about 2 miles per hour, piercing his tub. But yeah, I do get your point. Like, we need to see it more regularly, but has been a thing over a few years now. I think it's become a bit of a trend. So I'm not sure how he kind of gets out of that slump, but I do disagree with you saying that it's kind of the same as last season in some ways, because I think there has been an improvement, but maybe where last year he was getting pinned down by a lot of this misfortune, we're now just seeing that the ceiling maybe isn't tremendously high at the moment and could still be raised. But Penske is still in a transition phase. That's the impression that they continue to really give, that they are rebuilding, because last year was pretty destabilizing with the leadership changes. I think just the general performance as well, obviously being their worst season in 2.5 decades. So yeah, not a lost cause yet.
But I don't think you can say Newgarden's season has been dramatically improved when he's still being outperformed by David Malukas.
It's been improved, but I don't think it's...
Well, as I said, I will agree to disagree, because I don't think his performances have actually improved that significantly compared to last year.
Yeah,
because he should have won an Iowa race, and suddenly if he's got 2 victories last year, you're looking, actually that wasn't too bad of a season.
Yeah, kind of. But I mean, I'm just looking at the fact that he's already one shy of his top 10 tally in 8 fewer races, and I know obviously a lot of that was because of misfortune. But I think there's for sure been a step forward. He's 6th in points. He finished last season 12th in points, spent a lot of the season low teens in points. So there is a step forward here. I think it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, he's been very, he's not been candid at all on the injury. Like, he's kind of batting away questions when he's asked about it. He did say that he felt like a bit of a missing link in Detroit, but we don't know what the injury is. And, when we get back to Road America, obviously we've got 2 weeks now, which people will be relieved by in the paddock. But if it's a fracture of some sorts, I mean, you don't think 4 weeks on from Indy, or I guess it'll be 5 weeks. No, it will be 4 weeks at that point. So it won't be perfect still. So we might have to wait a little bit longer before we see him back at his best. But he certainly seems better, in a better frame of mind. Demeanor seems a lot more positive, and naturally so, because last year he was getting beaten down by races. He was getting a bombardment of criticism at points as well, which was naturally probably going to beat him down a little bit. So yeah, I think it's one to watch for the rest of the season for sure.
And his main contender was somebody who has kind of had a very similar couple of years to Josef Newgarden and Marcus Ericsson. A 2nd place finish, his best on and over outside of the Indianapolis 500. A pretty important result for Ericsson, ultimately, if we're going to look at the outlook of his future. But we've never seen him on a short oval look this comfortable, look this good in traffic, and making decisions and overtakes like he did. And that's very encouraging, because if Marcus Ericsson can show that he's got a short oval ability about him, that's going to ultimately improve his chances of keeping Andretti seat or looking elsewhere next year. And although he probably could have well got the win, and probably be a bit disappointed he didn't get the victory, ultimately this is still a very important result. And after the difficulties of last year and even the year before, it's starting to solidify a little bit more of what we expect from Marcus Ericsson. Yes, the race-to-race consistency isn't there, but we are up to 5 top 10 finishes halfway through the season, which is 3 more than he had for the entirety of last season. Obviously, his 2nd podium at Andretti as well. So a great performance all round. I think Ericsson has got right to maybe be a little bit disappointed. He really made sensational progress really on the opening stint, going from 12th to 1st there, and was kind of mixing up with Newgarden all night, and was just kind of unfortunate to lose on pit road. I mean, he was kind of the victim of Palou running out of fuel, which lost him a lot of time. But Ericsson can be very pleased. I think it's a huge result, especially when you're looking at kind of this portion of the season where teams will be looking and drivers will be looking towards their outlook for next season. So big day for Marcus Ericsson.
Yeah, I mean, he's back into 9th in points now. So that does, I know obviously we're only at the halfway mark, but that does signify something of a step forward after, I mean, a miserable first year and a doubly miserable second year. And you're kind of right to group them both together because they are the two drivers ahead of the season that we were kind of looking at as being, our favourites for our most improved title by the end of the year. And I think we're just seeing kind of signs of the Ericsson that we saw at Ganassi, some of that aggression back, which I think just feeds off from the fact that he's kind of just feeling a bit more confident in the car, getting a bit more trust in the car, which it feels like he just hasn't had in the last couple of years. I know obviously they had a lot of changes, maybe not lots of changes, but they had some restructuring around, this 28 stand in the off season. And maybe just as we get to this kind of deeper portion of the year, I mean, it's mad to think that we're at the halfway stage already, but all starting to just knit a bit more. And it is obviously a really pivotal point of the year because decisions do start to be made around this time in terms of futures. And Ericsson obviously is in a contract year. You've got Dennis Hauger looming at Dale Coyne Racing. Poor Dennis didn't even get to run the race because of a mechanical issue, but he is, he's looked good, obviously. So yeah, big decision for Andretti. And I think Ericsson is giving them, I guess the silver lining, if he had another terrible year this season, it would have made their decision easy for the future. But I think he's giving them a bit of a headache here because, looking ahead to next year, they're either going to have to gamble on a sophomore driver who's still pretty unproven, albeit we've seen a lot of promising signs and he dominated in Indy next.
Like Kirkwood, to make clear, in 2022.
For sure. Or you stick with a veteran as you kind of continue as a team to build and where stability is pretty valuable, because it was a weird weekend for Andretti. Like Kirkwood, there was quite a disparity between their cars in terms of where they qualified. Power was pretty far back. Power qualified
21st.
21st. Ericsson was 12th and Kirkwood was up in 3rd. So not a lot of consistency there, car to car, and they all seemed to run quite well in the race. It was a bit like Indianapolis where we kept hearing the fact they had really good race cars. And I mean, on this occasion, clearly Ericsson had something underneath him that he could really do stuff with, which, we just haven't really seen over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and as you say, this is going to be a huge decision, and it's going to be really, this is going to be possibly the biggest talking point of the driver market as to what Andretti Global do. But we talk about kind of this busy section of the season, drivers looking towards next year. Christian Rasmussen was on the chopping block last week. Everyone was like, okay, he's next to the last in the leader's circle. He can drive an oval, but he's really struggling and run street. What does Ed Carpenter Racing do? And as soon as discussions started picking up over, what Ed Carpenter Racing and Rasmussen's future would look like, we hear the news that Rasmussen's been locked down on a multi-year deal for 2027 to 2028 to try and, quieten down these suggestions. I think from Ed Carpenter's side, Rasmussen would have probably been in pursuit of the top teams, possibly based on what we saw last season. Obviously, maybe it's kind of a difficult start to this year, maybe moves the attention off him slightly, which means it gives them an opportunity to lock him down for a little bit longer. But the other side of it is kind of also removing that pressure for the rest of the year of him to perform, like we saw at Gateway, for example. But let's just obviously touch on the contract news before we get into Rasmussen's very impressive race. I found it surprising that they went for a multi-year deal for Rasmussen. Like, ultimately, as we were discussing last week, Rasmussen is so strong on short ovals, and he will probably win you at least one race a year and get you at least another podium. But his road street form is so inconsistent. Raw pace is there on occasion, but it's so inconsistent. It's kind of, what's that balance of, well, I want a driver who can win, but I also want a driver who can show consistency on each track type. And it would have made sense in my mind, okay, Ed Carpenter gives him a 1-year deal, releases the pressure off for this year and gives him that chance to develop. But I think when a multi-year deal really signifies to me that actually Rasmussen is going to become maybe the cornerstone of this team. Rossi's contract will go to the end of next year, so Rasmussen's locked in longer than Rossi's at this point, and he's the guy to kind of lead this team forward with the investment that they've got. And it's a lot of faith from Ed Carpenter. It's a bit of a risk on a guy who, as we said, is not proven on road street courses, but we know can wheel a race car around an oval. So a really interesting balance there, a pretty brave decision, but I kind of like the timing of it to just kind of stamp their authority on the situation and make clear that Rasmussen is their guy, and it's going to give him such a kind of pressure-free rest of the season. And when that pressure's off, we know what he can do.
Yeah, I think we kind of disagreed a bit in the immediate aftermath of this in terms of I was a bit more pro the move than you were, albeit I kind of do agree with the side that a multi-year deal is quite a commitment, really, to a driver who is still streaky, albeit, ultimately they are not going to want to lose a driver who can win them races, regardless of kind of the fact that, he's a very, there's obviously the big peaks on ovals, but there are low lows for Rasmussen, and we've seen that so far this season. He was 24th in points coming into Gateway, so it was a much needed result. Maybe it did signify the fact that this move and a real show of faith from Ed Carpenter and the leadership ownership team there at Ed Carpenter Racing kind of just really instilled confidence in Rasmussen, just showing that level of trust. But I think just to bear out some of the stats on road and street courses, he's done 27 road and street races. He only has 2 top 10 finishes. He only has 7 top 15 finishes as well. And even in qualifying, he's been into the Fast 12 7 times. He's only qualified in the top 15 10 times in those 27 races. So he is very much a kind of back quarter of the field driver for the most part on road and street courses, which long term isn't going to cut it, which is why I kind of do agree on your point, Dan, that a multi-year deal is pretty extensive, but then, drivers often don't like single-year deals. And if Rasmussen wants the multi-year deal, they've got a race-winning driver. And this is obviously an Ed Carpenter Racing team that has very high aims, but ultimately they're not one of the powerhouse 4. And simply having 2 race-winning drivers in your ranks, and in particular in Rasmussen, a driver who looks like he can basically win on any oval race at any stop this season, you just don't want to risk someone else snapping him up and getting that talent, because ultimately, when he has this really high level, I think there have been occasional glimpses of pace on road and street courses, few and far between. I think Ed Carpenter Racing's package has sometimes not allowed him to flourish. I think that's obviously getting better, and with that, the expectation will grow for Rasmussen to improve in that discipline. He needs to get better at finishing the job, for sure. Detroit crashing out before lap 10, having started in the top 10. You've got to be taking advantage of that sort of opportunities for sure. But if they can hone this kind of weaker area of his skill set, then you're facing a driver who can be something close to a complete package, given he is so good on ovals. And he is certainly a top 5 driver on ovals. He's probably a top 3 driver on ovals in the series. So there are 2 sides to the coin. He's a very kind of extreme, streaky driver, but I think it's for sure the peaks that Ed Carpenter Racing have put the faith in here and justifies getting that contract. But it is a balancing act that's pretty tough, given IndyCar goes to this kind of diverse range of tracks, and driver skill sets can absolutely suit one end of the scale more than the other.
And I guess kind of the perspective is Rasmussen will give you the peaks, but Alexander Rossi is your consistency guy. I think Rossi is maybe 1 top 5 finish in his time with the team thus far, but he has 7 or 8 top 10s, I believe, maybe possibly even more than that. So it is about finding that balance between, as you say, the peaks and the consistency. But I think it's pretty important timing. If he had a result like this, the eyes might be surrounding Rasmussen once again, from your likes of your McLarens, your Penske's, your Andretti's have a seat available. Let's make sure none of that's going to happen. And strategical move from Ed Carpenter Racing, take him out of the driving market, lock him down. But that's going to be a real confidence boost for Rasmussen going into the rest of the season. But the good news for Rasmussen continued this week, as we saw at Gateway, with a 3rd career podium, his 2nd in a row at Gateway. Obviously, kind of in the mix for victory, wasn't for the opening stages of the race, like we often see Rasmussen at ovals, but come those last 1 or 2 stints, he suddenly really puts himself into contention in the battle for the victory. Didn't seem to quite have the car that Ericsson and Newgarden had, but his style of driving was certainly on display, making the bold overtakes when he needed to, not being afraid to use the high line. We saw him make that ridiculous save about halfway through the race where he was on full opposite lock in turn 3 and somehow gets out of the barrier in true Rasmussen style. And the short oval prowess of Christian Rasmussen was back on show under the lights, like we expected. We saw it at Phoenix, and we always were going to expect it to happen again at Gateway, but at least this time he leaves with a concrete result. And a first podium in the season, still like 22nd in standings, which isn't ideal, but it's certainly better than the position he was in last week.
His new deal is, Ed Carpenter Racing clearly see it as good news, but it's just good news for the sport, because having a driver that's this enthralling in this particular discipline it's just brilliant for the sport, isn't it? It was the same kind of thing that we've seen from him over the last couple of years. Phoenix, we discussed it at the time, kind of maybe he could have been more patient, what have you. Obviously, Nashville, he crashed, but generally speaking, like he genuinely does walk the tightrope of risk and reward in an effective way, which is incredible given how on the edge he looks. But maybe he always seems to be running half a lane higher than everyone and just makes stuff happen, basically, that nobody else can. And he has to, because he doesn't tend to qualify that well on the ovals. Like in the last year or so, I think there's maybe one, I think he qualified, started ninth. I don't remember exactly where it was, but generally speaking, he's qualified pretty far back. So he's having to work for this. But I hope he never starts qualifying well on ovals, to be honest, because it'd be pretty boring if he was at the front. He'd probably win by a lap.
His average over qualifying, this is only last year's, to make clear, his average over qualifying last year was 17.5. His best qualifying position was 10th in Milwaukee. I mean, that is unbelievable. And he was the biggest mover in the race on Sunday, as we saw as well. So Sunday or Monday? Did it finish Monday US time?
I mean, I watched the entire race on Monday. I think it Eastern time it finished on Monday.
Central time?
Central time, I think it finished about 5:30 UK time. So it would have been about 11:30.
Just made it Sunday. Fine, we can't say Sunday/Monday. But be confidence boost ultimately. Like now that he's got the result he needed, pressure's off from a contract situation. I think most important thing is continue showing what he can do at Milwaukee. 2 chances there. Nashville hasn't been so great, but we'll see what happens there. But ultimately, as we said, road course is going to be a big challenge for him, and he needs to show that improvement the next couple of races and show why Ed Carpenter have put their faith in him. But going from towards the bottom of the standings right to the top of the standings, it for once was a difficult day for Alex Palou and the number 10 Chip Ganassi Racing team. Now, we say so much about Palou's fortune and his luck every week, and yes, there are some occasions where Palou does get the rub of the green. However, on this occasion, it didn't. And therefore, we can't say every week that Palou gets lucky every week, because he got unlucky this week whilst competing for a top 5 or top 10. Obviously, this one was it an error on the 10 team? I don't think it was an error. They got unlucky at the caution ultimately, and they did run it fine.
The way that I would put it is, I think they took a risk by pitting when they pitted to kind of try and, I mean, you were kind of gambling on caution happening anyway in order to be able to do it on one more stop. I think that was, given the position they were in, I don't think he had a race-winning car necessarily, but he was certainly in that fight for the final podium spot, I would say. I think Ericsson and Newgarden were above and beyond the 2 strongest guys out there. But I think they probably took too much of a risk by pitting when they did. Like, they weren't in a position where they kind of needed to throw a Hail Mary. They rarely are. But we've also learnt with Palou and the 10 team, they do like to go pretty aggressive to give themselves what they feel was the best chance of winning. And I think ultimately, like if the caution had fallen a little bit differently in the red flag and everything, I mean, it could have won in the race, because ultimately everybody else was merging back onto that strategy anyway. And I think he was probably going to come out of the head because he was at the head as a result of that strategy. But it was probably like they did get unlucky ultimately that the red flag came out and he's had to trundle around on basically no fuel. But I'd say it was a bit of a misjudgment. I don't think you can say it was purely unlucky. I think they took a risk and it didn't pay off. It didn't pay off for Dixon either. So it was something that basically the 2 best strategists in the game went for, and it didn't pay off. So 50-50, I would say. I don't know where you lie.
I mean, on Dixon's side, they did play it safe, right, by taking that penalty, knowing they would have to restart at the back. They admitted the consequences. Could he have stretched it? We don't know. But ultimately, there's a few factors. You said they needed a caution, which kind of came out at a weird time for them. Like, ultimately, it didn't look like they were going to make it anyway. Then the caution kind of saved them, and then it didn't. I mean, what was bizarrely unlucky, Long Beach, Palou won the race because he was in the last pit box. I mean, if he was in the first pit box here, it would have saved him, ultimately. I mean, he got, it's one of those things. Palou's the victim of his own success by qualifying so well recently that he got the first pit stop right at the end, which meant to trundle all the way down to the end, which kind of lost him a little bit. It's the 10 team always play a very fine line, as you say. Like, we see this a lot of times. They're always ones to, we always say they get fortunate of cautions. Like last week at Detroit was they flipped it. They were the ones to pit first and they got it right once again. And that's the fine line you have to play. But ultimately, this one, they were wrong by literal meters.
And he made it back to his pit box, but it was kind of that Hunter Ray-esque situation from the 500 last year where he's out of fuel and it's very hard to get the car refired when it's run so dry. So yeah, that was unlucky as well. I think it's worth mentioning the highs of this weekend, though, that he's now got 4 successive pole positions. First time any driver's done that in 15 years. Will Power in 2011. And what makes Palou unique is he's done it on all 4 different track types at IndyCar visits. Obviously, with the Indy Road Course, Indy 500 being a super speedway, street course in Detroit, short over the Gateway, and Gateway not having been a particularly happy hunting ground for him. I mean, he's still never got a podium there. I think he only had 1 qualifying results inside the top 5, if I am correct. So pretty impressive. And he was 1.1 mile per hour quicker than David Malukas next to, I mean, it was an insane benchmark like that he set in qualifying.
Ridiculous. I like where they pulled that from. Like, I really don't know.
I said this after Detroit. He has become the new benchmark in qualifying, and this very much wasn't the case even a year and a half ago. He had 6 poles coming into last year. He now has 17. He's got 5 of the 9 poles this year, it's astounding what he's managing to do in qualifying, because he was always a strong qualifier. He was always a consistent qualifier, but he's added to his incredible racecraft and race form and ability to execute on race day this just obscene pace everywhere over 1 lap.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, he's also become a force to be reckoned with for short ovals. Won Iowa last year. Okay, yes, his fortune fell his way that day. Milwaukee, if it wasn't for that random burst of rain late on, he would have won that. He probably wasn't in victory contention in Gateway, but ultimately qualified very well and probably still would have been at least a top 5. Like, he is a guy to be reckoned with in short ovals. He's not the guy who is, short ovals is weakness. Here's our chance to catch up to him. Finishing outside the top 5 in a short oval for Palou is now a surprise. Like, a podium is the expectation now.
I would just like to get your take on, before we move on from Palou, the incident with Nolan Siegel that ultimately put Nolan Siegel out of the race, because Palou's gone up the inside of Siegel, who he's lapping in turn 1. It was a kind of aggressive lunge. Siegel makes contact with Palou's right rear corner. Siegel's left front puts him in the wall. Siegel. Ultimately, okay, it was an aggressive move from Palou, I would say. I think it was a tough one for race control to call. I know there's obviously been a lot of talk about they need to stop being the headline IndyCar officiating. And ultimately here, regardless of what call they made, people were going to disagree because it was a fine line. Because, yes, it was this mixture of Palou making an aggressive dive. I think Siegel probably moved down a little bit before he could have done, especially knowing he wasn't fighting this car for position. I wouldn't put any blame on Siegel's spotter, because it was a last-minute move that Palou's made, and ultimately you can't necessarily warn your driver of that as a spotter. I don't feel like. I ultimately also think Siegel just left the room for Palou to just dive into. I know there's obviously an argument that Siegel maybe coming back down, you had to take the natural line at some point. And yeah, I don't know. I think Palou probably thought he might have been clear of Siegel, was the impression I got initially. But I kind of, having looked at replays, I don't really think either of them did anything particularly wrong. I think it was just one of those unfortunate racing deals. Thoughts?
I don't really have loads to add, to be honest. I think Siegel's unfortunate, I think, is the bottom line there. Like, ultimately, that isn't something that should take him out the race. Palou was aggressive. I think would a more veteran oval driver, like, let's say, Newgarden or maybe a Dixon, make that kind of move? I don't know. Siegel ultimately did leave Palou the opportunity to turn in. Like, it's not like the line was blocked. Palou was a little bit high of the apex. I would also say, like, he maybe could have gone down slightly to the centre. I would say it's like 55, 45 Palou, but I don't think if you're penalising stuff like that, you're just going to end up penalising everything. It was just unfortunate that Siegel ended up in the barrier. Like I said, slightly more blame to Palou, but I don't think it's a really big issue. It's just unfortunate.
It's about as racing deal as a racing deal you can get, I feel like. It's just,
like, I can see why Siegel's annoyed, and like I'd see why Palou was annoyed in the chance of getting penalised.
Like, I don't think either of them were really blaming each other anyway. I think they kind of just accepted it was kind of a bit of a freak thing.
Yeah. I don't really have it was just unfortunate. It's just the word of this one. And it's only right, really, we give a little mention to Rinus VeeKay. Was there all day, not quite in the win contention, maybe an outside shot of the podium, but really made his way forward really impressively from 13th from the grid. And we've seen what he can do on ovals in the past. He ran very well here last year, and Gateway's a track he's always actually ran pretty well at. It's been kind of a little rough patch since, throughout the season, really started very well at St. Petersburg and had a good 500. But we saw the oval package that Hungos had here last year, Connor Daly, and it's good to see if VeeKay's really kind of back that up. And it's not actually, it's just Daly's really, really good at ovals. I mean, VeeKay is obviously good at ovals himself. It kind of shows me a bit of confidence with JHR that they actually do have a really solid oval package. And VeeKay drove very well. It was kind of him, Rasmussen, and Colette, we'll get onto very shortly, who are kind of those three really mixing it up in the top five, and a good showing for Rinus VeeKay, and he lies exactly in the sweet spot in the standings between 12th and 14th.
That was a pretty Daly-esque drive in a lot of ways, because he crashed at the end of first practice, salvaged 13th in qualifying, which was a pretty good effort. And the way in which he raced forward, I was extremely impressed by. I think the way I would put this season, I mean, JHR haven't had a driver ever finish inside the top 15 in points, and VeeKay is there pretty comfortably at the moment. He's on 175 points. Ferrucci in 16th is on 146. So there's a decent margin there. I think
just bear in mind you do have power at 145. So yes, one behind Ferrucci, you probably will get him at some point.
Yeah, of course. But I think the way I would kind of categorize VeeKay's season is there have been weekends where JHR have been massively off the pace, but he is proving himself just as a really great maximizer. And I mean, this weekend was the ultimate of that. I don't think he could have got a podium. I know there was a point later on he was challenging Rasmussen, but faded a little bit. But this is a seriously good result for this team, a team that's obviously only got one podium in their history. So for him to be one spot off that is a really standout performance. And he's just getting the most out of this car. And this was another day that just really affirms that belief that this is a driver that really deserves a shot at one of the real front-running teams. I think that's what you've ultimately got to look at a driver who's at one of these smaller teams, is whether they are getting the most out of every weekend. And I feel like the vast majority of VeeKay's weekends you look at and think not much more on the table there for a team that are pretty inconsistent in the package that they can deliver. Road and street courses, you'll have some weekends where they're on, some weekends where they look pretty poor, but VeeKay just seems to manage to put himself somewhere in the game, and as much in the game as he possibly can.
I will say, in fairness, actually, VeeKay has finished in top 15 every race this season, bar Phoenix, where he had that collision with Pelé, but it had looked pretty good. And even the EGP where he finished 15th, he had that really bizarre start where he was crushed into kind of as they went green and maybe lost a little bit there. So, no, actually, if I look into a little bit further, hasn't been too bad a year, and you're right, maybe maximising opportunities quite a lot, and just needs to really continue doing that. And there seems to be a little bit more talk about him going to top seats, as we said. And Andretti seat 3, McLaren seat 3, Penske seat 3. Is there a Ganassi seat 3 as well? I heard some of Dixon's up, but I don't think Dixon's going to be going. So there might be a hypothetical Ganassi seat, but not in reality.
It's apparently a contract year, but
Dixon ain't going anywhere. He's not going to coin next season, like the old time joking remit. As I mentioned a minute ago, kind of the final driver really kind of in that surprise pack with VeeKay and Rasmussen. Rasmussen, I say surprise. People who have made their way forward was Kai Colette. Kai Colette was certainly a surprise. Has had a decent rookie season, shown flashes of pace, but hasn't really shown anything concrete on the ovals. We were kind of expecting very little. Didn't really show loads in Indy next in the ovals, but really came to the fore here at Gateway, qualifying 20th, but really made great progress for the opening stint. And he kind of just stayed comfortably in the top 10 all day, and he looked superb, like making the right moves when he needed to, showing the right balance between aggression and kind of patience, and really looked like somebody well beyond his years. And as you obviously all saw, had an engine failure towards the end of running in the top 10, which is the most devastating of heartbreaks. I mean, he looked very emotional in the interview, and you feel a bit sorry for him, because this was kind of the result that his year slowly been building up to. We've kind of seen him each race, I feel, gain a little bit more confidence. We're seeing a little bit more of him race by race, but we really didn't expect that to come on the ovals. Yes, he impressed at the 500, but everywhere else is so different to what we see at Indy. But really felt like a natural out there, and ultimately that's very encouraging signs. I mean, outperformed Santino Ferrucci, who's often renowned for his oval expertise, and encouraging for Colette. Of course, he's going to be disappointed, but there was nothing he could really do, and he put no foot wrong. And obviously, a chance of top 5 gone there, which was super unfortunate because it was, I wouldn't say one of the standout drives of the season. It could be definitely his standout drive of the season, and it's actually, it gives a little bit of a confidence boost for him, but kind of puts a bit more belief, at least in my perspective, are actually Colette's maybe performing at a level better than maybe what we expected him to.
Yeah, I think the fact that he is, let me just work this out quickly. I mean, he is 34 points behind Dennis Hauger in the Rookie of the Year standings. And I don't feel like that's quite fair. I think they've both had seasons where you look at and think they just don't look out of place. Like sometimes you can see rookies and they look noticeably out of place, but they're aggressive in wheel-to-wheel like situations. I think Hauger, there were times, I mean, I think even the Detroit weekend where you kind of look at him and he's making lunges and he's fighting wheel to wheel. He's not afraid to bang wheels. I think saw a similar thing with Foster last year. And that's the sort of thing that really kind of just instills confidence in them as a driver and shows the confidence that they already have. And Colette, it was a very similar story because he's made it forward from 20th into the top 10 entirely on merit, entirely through his racecraft. And I think it just has been a very methodical season, really. Like there's not been, I mean, I was going to say it's not been flashy. There have been obviously very big flashes like qualifying at Indy, albeit not counting. And yeah, obviously this now, and it was pretty gutting really seeing how upset he was afterwards. But it was the sort of weekend that really makes you think like this is only the beginning. And I think he's kind of endearing himself to fans too. He's a really kind of likable, if sometimes a little bit understated character, but I think that sort of humility, I mean, it kind of reflects the character we often see from Alex Palou, interestingly, but there's something quite endearing about that, I think. And yeah, heck of a drive. And, ultimately there's a DNF. Obviously it matters for points. I don't think it matters. We all still saw what he did. And I mean, at one point he was up on the podium. I know that was a little bit fortuitous with a caution, but still nailing the strategy he's executing. And he wasn't, he didn't look out of place when he was up there either. So kudos, chapeau.
Okay, let's go over our running order from Gateway. So Newgarden, Ericsson, Rasmussen, your podium, VK in 4th, Scott McLaughlin in 5th place. I did want to briefly touch on Scott McLaughlin because I don't know whether it's a package thing. I feel like it maybe is a package thing, but kind of enter 2024, we were like, this is the guy on ovals. Like he was getting so many podiums on ovals, he's running over races. And I mean, he's winless since Milwaukee in 2024 in any track type. It just kind of feels like, compared to Newgarden and this year, Malukas, like he is just a half a pace back compared to what we see from that. I don't know what your thoughts are, but we saw it at Phoenix and kind of here as well. Like he wasn't bad by any means. I mean, 5th place is a good result, but it just didn't feel like he had. I guess it's pretty similar to Malukas outside of qualifying, but it just feels like a step behind Newgarden, which we didn't see in 2024.
Yeah, like I'm not sure he particularly. I think there were times in 24 where you think like, he looks super confident with the car. On ovals, he's just completely on rails. I don't think here, just like he maybe didn't have the package beneath him. I mean, even
but that's
when
not a new thing. Like Gateway last year was the same. Phoenix was the same.
Yeah. This
year, like Iowa last year, I don't know, he crashed, which kind of ruined his weekend there. But
I think there was the point where he put fresh tires on late in the race, and you kind of thought, oh my God, he's going to do Rasmussen, Nashville, Newgarden, Phoenix type thing. And he just kind of stalled in 5th place. So there's something more to find for McLaughlin, just missing the peaks that we saw a lot more frequently a couple of years ago.
6th place was Carl Kirkwood, closes the gap to Alex Palou in the championship. It is now back under a race victory. Like he was the defending race winner. I don't think we kind of really expect him to defend that crown. But what I would say about Kirkwood and Andretti is the consistency is unreal. And we've said this all season. Like a 6th place result, it didn't feel like they had a particularly strong package beneath them. Ericsson did. But it didn't feel like that was quite the case for Kirkwood. But like you said for VK, it just feels like Kirk was maximising. I don't think he could have done much more in 6th place. His only finish outside the top 10 this year remains at the Indy 500, where we know he had a pretty difficult run there. So peak performance is not there outside of street courses realistically. But when it's not a street course, it feels like generally they are getting the best result they possibly can. I know I did say this last week, but most of the time, it feels like they are doing it, and I feel like this was another example of it. Malukas in 7th obviously was really probably the favourite him this weekend, given his Gateway record and Penske's record. Just didn't have the package underneath him, is what he's kind of been saying since.
Got the setup wrong.
Yeah, qualified well in second, but yeah, kind of got the setup wrong there and couldn't really make the moves he needed to, like we've seen him do the last couple of years. So, bit of a shame for somebody who we expected to really be at the forefront there, but that one will come. We'll be patient.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shame for Malukas, and a bit of shame for the race as well, not having him factoring into that battle with Newgarden, Ericsson, Rasmussen, because we know he's obviously capable of that. Anyway, on Malukas, we did manage to catch up with him in a pre-event press conference just to speak a little bit about the Detroit weekend, first off, which he described as his worst mental performance of his career, and also what the process has been just in terms of getting over the heartbreak at the Indy 500. So here is David Malukas.
You obviously said Detroit was kind of one of your worst performances from a mental standpoint. So I'm just interested, kind of following up to earlier, what lessons you maybe learned from what went wrong on that front last weekend.
From my, I look at myself 24 years old. I try my best to keep myself in a calm state of mind. And I try my best to not let things really get to me, because it does affect performance on track. I've noticed for myself just in previous years. And Detroit, certain moments, certain things didn't really go our way, and I really let it get to me when normally I try my best not to. And I feel like I've done a good job of that up until Detroit. So that's kind of more of the mental reset, is not letting little things kind of amplify and start affecting me. And from that perspective, going into the performance.
And then just looking at the last couple of weeks for you, David, obviously there were quite heightened emotions after the 500. So what process did you kind of undergo immediately after that in order to kind of process that and obviously move on to what is a busy period of races?
It was pretty much just after that, the night right after the 500, I just didn't sleep all night and just stared at a wall, running different things of what I could have done differently. But honestly, after that one night, I mean, it was pretty much reset. I was already, looking forward to Detroit and moving on from it. I think it's a rule that's kind of within the team. I think drivers, everybody in general, is, you don't want to be dwelling on previous races that much.
Let's move on to 8th place, Willpower. Qualified disastrously, as we said at the start. But trouble free, yes, he had a little bit of a saga at the start where he went a lap down because he made that pit stop. Ultimately, I think this result still feels so good for Willpower, like a top 10 finish with no absolute catastrophes. Like, it's not what it's not what he's aiming for, but you have to take the small wins at this point for Willpower. And I mean, they went on a pretty funky strategy, which worked out pretty well in the end. So, well done.
Yeah, I mean, he just so needed it. It's just been everything. I'm pretty sure I had a dream last night that Power had crashed out of the race that had already happened. So, kind of just says how ingrained that is in his season. But he didn't crash out. He finished 8th. And I mean, where does that rank in terms of his best results of the year?
Second best result.
It's mental.
9th place.
I'm not so sure.
You didn't. You're not so sure.
I mean, he qualified 6th.
He qualified 6th. We didn't see him.
We didn't see him, but he also didn't move.
Well, that's the whole point. That's the whole point.
I don't know. I thought a criteria of the Armstrong ability is you kind of didn't see him at all weekend, and he actually qualified quite well. It was pretty quick.
I couldn't even tell you what livery he ran.
Remax.
Now you've reminded me on that. He did nothing all race.
Yeah, it was kind of Armstrong ability, although
it
went
absolutely
backwards.
was Armstrong. The criteria was never you went forwards. It was you end up in the top 10 when nobody saw you the entire race, which he absolutely was.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's too much of a kind of backward step.
Fans, let us know. I am 100%. This is Armstrong ability. I didn't see him. Like, was he racing? He might have been.
Didn't see him, but often not seeing him is a good thing. And then here, we didn't see him after being in a very promising position. So,
was he in a promising position? Though he qualified 6th.
Qualified 6th.
6th was a good, yeah, but he didn't like. He just stayed there and kind of stayed around the top 10 the entire time. That is Armstrong ability.
It's also another decent day for him. Like you must admit, in terms of ovals, like he's become a pretty decent force on ovals. It's an interesting one for Maya Shank, actually. Obviously, you'll get to Rosenqvist in the order, but they qualified really well in 4th and 6th. Ganassi had tested at Gateway, so they had a bit of an upper hand there. Obviously, Shank having the alliance, but I don't know. They both just faded in the race. Rosenqvist down in 14th.
Lundgaard 10th, O'Ward 11th. O'Ward obviously did some stuff post-race, which I wanted to briefly touch on. It feels like he's getting a little bit frustrated.
Yeah,
because they're all these top fives, no podiums, there's no real results to show for it. They don't have the pace where other teams are going. He couldn't really make any overtakes. He was falling back on pit lane every time they went in for a stop. And he just says a lot of small things have just taken a small step back this year, which is just costing them. And you can see it. Like, Award, who is so good around Gateway, to finish 11th is a bit of a concern, I think, for McLaren.
Yeah, I mean, he was anonymous all weekend, more or less. And it's like, he did a media availability earlier in the week, and I was quite struck by how much he was speaking about them being in kind of a transitional kind of period, because I thought we were kind of past that with Aaron McLaren in terms of last year was a real foundation layer, and this year they were actually going to kick on and make kind of essentially cut that gap to Ganassi. Not necessarily saying they were going to fight for a championship this year, but after obviously having their best season ever, 2 top 5s in the championship, and ultimately they are still there. But O'Ward was second. He was runner up to Pato last year. He was essentially best in class in terms of the non-Pato class, and we've just seen none of that this year. I mean, he just doesn't, as you say, like, he's had this consistency of 6 top 5s without being on the podium, but just doesn't have the machinery essentially or whatever beneath him, or even the execution team wide in order to fight for the bigger prizes. So it's bizarre. I was just really struck by how much he was kind of saying, oh, they might have to take a backward step to go forwards, in terms of, like, I thought this was 2-3 years ago this was happening. I know obviously they've moved shop.
Well, McLaren have been transitioning ever since they came into the series, and that was 6 years ago. Like, where do we get to the point where they need to win championships?
Exactly. And he just looks like he's cutting a bit of a frustrated figure. And yeah, I don't understand where this kind of faltering execution's kind of coming from, because it really felt like they were in a great position as the best Chevrolet team last year. And all of a sudden you've got O'Ward kind of speaking a lot about the fact there's this big gulf to Ganassi and Penske, and they've been a benchmark for so long and we don't know how to get there, basically, which is kind of alarming, I think. And I don't know whether it speaks to disillusionment from his side, because obviously he's got such a loyalty to that organization, but it's creeping towards that stage. It would feel like to me, and that's just purely me observing from the outside. But
I mean, I've been thinking, like, and I think people have said this before, but for the sake of his career, he's 27, he's coming to his peak years, and it's becoming more evidently clear that he probably won't win a championship with Aaron McLaren at the rate things are going, because it's felt like since 2021 he will win a championship with Aaron McLaren at some point, and well, when's that going to happen? And does a team Penske or a Ganassi like snap him up? Ultimately, that's a question for next year. He's still under contract 2027, but he's becoming a little bit more outspoken, is O'Ward, about the issues.
I was struck by his honesty. I thought he would be a bit more positive, kind of just the few. I know he did interviews after the race, but even when we had the midweek availability with him, I was definitely struck by, I think just his candidness, really. Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see kind of how it develops the rest of the season. They go to some tracks they have been good at before. Road America's got a few podiums at Mid-Ohio, one a couple of years ago. Nashville, he probably should have won last year. So there's a good stretch of races to kind of turn that around. But we're getting to the point of the season where we're halfway through the year. O'Ward hasn't got a podium. And it's like you'd expect a lot better. And that's not simply him. I don't think he's driving that badly. It just seems like a package issue. Even Lungar's pretty inconsistent race to race, which was the same issue they had last year. So even more so. But anyway, let's play in the clips. We spoke to O'Ward midweek about kind of balancing this kind of busy schedule of the season, as well as kind of how you prepare a car for Gateway when you have two completely different ends of the track.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly, I have felt a lot of pressure relief, really. I know we still have plenty of championship to go, and that's where our full focus is on. I mean, this time last year, we're closer to the lead of the championship versus where we were last year, so that's a good thing. And that's where we're going to be, trying to catch and to keep on scoring good, strong points. And I feel like this weekend in Gateway, Worldwide Technology Raceway, sorry, that's gonna be a good opportunity for us. And then just in the off weekends that I have, obviously, I think either being home or, seeing some friends of mine is probably going to be what I'll end up doing, because it has been a stressful stretch. Just the 500 always is. It's just what you expect.
And heading into Gateway, it's obviously a unique oval because the two corners are completely separate, completely different from the other ends of the track. So, kind of setup-wise, how do you approach that? Is it a case of you kind of have to be a bit happy in both? Do you kind of prioritize making one corner really good, sacrificing the other one? Like, from a setup perspective, is there trying to find a little bit of a balance of prioritizing one, or is it a possibility to get it nailed on in both corners?
No, you got to get it down in both corners, because you've got opportunities to attack people on both ends of the track. And whenever you set up to actually pass someone on your chosen end of the track, where maybe your car is stronger than the other guy, you still have to have a good run through the other section, because that's what's basically going to give you that opportunity to set it up.
12th place was Scott Dixon. By the way, he's now 12th in the standings, which is, 4 finishes outside the top 10 this season.
He
it's
has
not a very Scott Dixon year.
He had his hybrid failure at was it this year the wheel came off in St. Pete?
Yes, that was this year. Yep.
So, ultimately, he's had misfortune in there.
Misfortune, but like a lot of other people above him have had misfortune. So, it's just a bit of a strange year, really, to see Scott Dixon that low in the standings halfway through.
And interesting stat from Tony DeZino, who says, and this is I don't know why it was alarming, because obviously they are the benchmark, but first time since 2019, also at Gateway, that Ganassi have not had a single car in the top 10. Rosenqvist finished 11th on that occasion. Dixon finished 20th. So that's mad. A 7-year run of having cars in the top 10, at least one car in the top 10, is pretty good going.
Ferrucci was 13th, Rosenqvist in 14th. They were the last cars on the lead lap. Rowan Grosjean was 15th, Mick Schumacher was 16th, both a lap down. Yep.
Schumacher, funnily enough, this was actually not a bad weekend, given, his teammates, Graham Rahal qualified all right in 11th. It was another, what felt like validation that they were heading in the right direction on short ovals. Louis Foster, albeit battling a hybrid problem, we know he's a massive fan of the hybrid, and I think he also had some damage, was way off the pace pretty much from the outset.
He finished 10 laps down. He wasn't slow.
No, he was in the pits for a while for repairs at one point, but he was multiple laps down at one point. Rahal...
He was a bit of the Rahal moving chicane we've seen on short overs recent years.
To an extent. And, he qualified 17th, Louis, Schumacher 18th. At least it isn't them qualifying slower than Indy Next speeds. But, Rahal crashed out. I think, to be fair, he'd said in the interview he was starting to get happy with the car, just got up a bit high, got into the marbles. But it was a worrying day for that. Rahal even, he dropped a lot of positions off the start, so that was a bit worrying. But I think there's at least positivity possibly for Schumacher. I know he's a lap down, but there were times where you saw that car making moves and you were like, is this actually Schumacher's car? Because there was, he was making some outside moves, and I don't know, I was just fairly impressed seeing that, given he's a rookie with no oval experience. So one to watch there. I know it's pretty unremarkable, but I thought there were some positive signs.
Yeah, he is still, unfortunately, jointly last in the standings, but it's his best result of the year. So,
is it?
Small gains. Yeah, apparently so. It's one of those races, ultimately, he did have a problem. He says quite a lot. He had decent results. Prior best was 17th in Long Beach, so surprisingly best result of the year. Pato was 17th, ended up 2 laps down after that fuel issue. Rossi was 18th, Rob was 19th, Foster 20th, Simpson 21st. He had a wild day, had a penalty at the start for being out of line. Then he had his fuel run out like Pato. His was a bit more strange, though, because he wasn't really that close at all to making the pits. So I don't really know what happened there. Collette was 22nd, Ray was 23rd, as we mentioned. Seagull obviously had his incident with Pato, and Hauger, as we said, unfortunately didn't even make the start. Okay, the race's unsung hero. This is a bit of a weird one this week, to be honest.
I think
because all the people who should be unsung, I feel like, had good results.
Yeah, I think there's 2 names, though, right, that you probably are the 2. I think they are unsung enough that they deserve some recognition.
VK and Collette.
I would say VK and Collette. So take your pick. I'll take Renus.
I think Colette's songs have been sung enough.
Okay, well, I'll pick VK then.
This is hard.
I mean, VK's the obvious one. If Collette's ruled
Yeah,
out,
but
ruled
I
out,
feel
then-
like VK, people recognise VK had a good run. I will go. I want to go for Kirkwood. He's a defending winner, so that does feel
And
a
he
bit
also-
strange to
and
say.
he also dropped 3 positions.
I'm going to go for Power because
good
he
stuff.
was a lap down and was on a bit of a weird strategy,
big.
but still pulled it off. So
Yeah.
let's go for Power.
See,
Top
but
three-
I'd like people's thoughts on whether Collette qualifies or not.
Oh, yeah, okay. No, I don't think he does. I think the broadcasts were making it quite clear that he was having a good drive. So that's my thoughts. God, the viewers have a lot to discuss in this episode. We are not agreeing on a lot of topics. And let's go on to top 3 drivers of the week. And again, this is a pretty difficult one because, I mean, ultimately, Newgarden Ericsson, I'll probably say Ericsson was more impressive for me considering his lack of short oval success.
Yeah.
So Ericsson 1, Newgarden 2, and 3rd. You've got so many to choose from here.
I was tempted to go for a rogue VK as my driver of the
No,
weekend.
I'm going to go Rasmussen 3rd. It's pretty boring in the end, but
Yeah, it's tough on this. Like if you're looking at driver of the weekend, if that's how we're framing it, I probably would go for VK, which is weird because he's my unsung hero. So,
how? He qualified 13th.
Yeah, just rate the way that he raced. I think obviously.
But would you not say Rasmussen raced better than VK?
Yeah, I guess you could, but I was just really impressed by VK.
Well, we know your
not-
history of you and Arenas VK.
I'm gonna go for. It feels harsh not putting Rasmussen in my top 3. I'm gonna go for Ericsson, Newgarden, and VK.
Shock. Funny moments. Speaking of Rasmussen, he had this argument with Spotter halfway through. His Spotter was, let's say, was enthusiastic about Rasmussen's performance. And
Enthusiastic to the extent it almost started sounding ever so slightly patronizing when he was saying, "You did a great job. You handled it well."
And Rasmussen just told him to shut up, which was pretty amusing. I thought it was Schumacher at first because for some reason it sounded really like Schumacher. I was like, that's unlike Mick, but no, it turned out to be Rasmussen, which made a little bit more sense. The other thing I thought was quite funny, and in the next race, the guy doing the command, oh my word, he was absolutely going for it. The guy was just belting it into that microphone. I was very impressed.
I also think Newgarden confusing Rasmussen and Rossi and thinking he was battling with a lapped car was quite something. Newgarden saying he was going to take pelters for us in the debrief. But I think the actual funny moment of the weekend is Cut and Dry was in the night practice session when the booth just completely lost it because Jack Harvey said something completely innocent and they clearly took it in a different way as a bit of an innuendo. And I've never heard so much dead air with just off-mic laughter in the background. It was absolutely hilarious. No one even knew what he said. Harvey didn't even know what he'd said that had caused the storm. But for a good 2 minutes, there was just dead air. They tried to speak again. Hinch tries to say something and just ends up cracking up and losing it once again. So that's the funny moment for me. That was peak comedy. That was hilarious. Just before we go into the prediction tournaments and conclude for the episode, I just have a couple of small talking points I wanted to raise, just that came to me through the weekend. And this is it is pretty minute, but why do they make drivers stick in their cars during a red flag? They're absolutely cooking in their cars. I think it's always really silly when they're just sat there for half an hour or however long, just sat in their cars. They did let them out to go to the toilet eventually and then call them back to their cars within 2 minutes, which gave you the amusing sight of Pato and Lundgaard and people sprinting down pit lane, Dixon just casually walking rather than panicking. So that's one. I don't know if you have anything to add. You probably don't. It's very minute.
I skipped the red flag because I had to catch up. So
okay.
I've got no comments.
So 2, and this is one you probably will have comments on. Cautions are way too long. And the caution that made me think of this was the one where ultimately rain fell. So it wasn't really fair to say it off that one. But that just made me think, generally speaking, sometimes, even if you're looking at Detroit last week, an incident, I mean, obviously we went through it, incidents cleared themselves up and they threw cautions. Yet you'd still be circling under caution for like 4 or 5 laps. And you just end up losing so many laps under caution. when they just keep going and going. There has to be some way to kind of speed the procedure up. And I guess you're always going to kick yourself a bit there in terms of the pits being initially closed and then having to go through the process of them opening and then everyone pitting. But it just feels like the whole process is way too long sometimes. And you've just got to if there's not a major clear up, you've just got to get the race going again.
I guess a lot of the problem though is they also have to clean the high line, which ultimately turns out good for the sake
That's
of the races.
fine. I don't care so much.
But like Rahul's one, like he had his medical center interview before it started raining. He was still under the same yellow. And at that point, I thought, well, that is dragging on a little bit.
But I almost do think it's more of a problem on road and street courses. But it was just last night made me think of it because I mean we were circling under rain, but it just came to mind basically.
But like, even then, like we were just wasting laps under like.
Or do you think just red flag it as soon as there's rain, or?
Well, yeah. What's the point of circling or just wasting laps when nothing is going on? I don't know if you think differently, but like, why would you spend...
I guess it's a case of like if the rain does subside immediately and the track's obviously hot enough that it doesn't have an impact, then you look a bit silly if you're going through the whole red flag procedure. But
the red flag procedure can just be stop in the pits and just wait for 10 minutes and then we go again.
Yeah, I don't know whether like if there's an incident that doesn't require lots of cleanup, you can just have a quick caution, and also maybe you don't open the pits before the caution's done. Or
I've just seen how many laps Rahul's one was. How many do you think it is?
Was it like? I don't really remember it specifically. Was it like 30 laps?
Yeah, 28 laps. I mean, that is over a tenth of the race just circling under yellow.
It's mad when you put it that way, to be fair. And
the conditions one afterwards, 14 laps. That's a lot. Just circling. The ones for Colette and the first crash between Seagull and Pato were both 7 laps, which isn't too bad. But I mean, 28 and 14 laps is a lot.
Yeah, and just the final talking point I had, and we actually, because we're recording late, get the benefit of having the ratings. The Fox rating was for 945,000 viewers, which actually, to be fair, is probably more than expected, given, I mean, unfortunately, there was a football game going on, an American football game, that could, like, they have Will Buxton explain this. If an event is happening, they will finish that event, and that's ultimately meant that IndyCar, with all the delays, was able to stay on Fox for the end of the race, but obviously meant the race start and the cool kind of explosions and everything that was missed, which was a shame. But to still have basically 950k viewers is pretty decent, given the race obviously dragged on a heck of a lot and went so late. I think if you're going to have the race that late again, which I'm not necessarily complaining about, because I think IndyCar under the lights is cool. Like, we've had night races in the past where it doesn't go dark until you get to the final third of the race or what have you. And you've just got to do it on a Saturday, because you're going to lose people that are dropping out because they've got to go to work early on Monday. If your main market is covered by the Eastern time zone, you're racing until midnight and people are working the next day. It's not super ideal. So I would probably say they should effort to get that on a Saturday night. Race of the season so far after the 500. I can't think of any others that really stand out.
Indy GP was pretty fun.
GP was very chaotic.
Phoenix. Phoenix was better. Phoenix was arguably better than that.
Yeah, Phoenix. I mean, it was a long time ago now, to be honest. A lot's happened since Phoenix. I don't remember. I don't remember it vividly, but I do remember coming away from the weekend being like, "Heck yeah, we've got to do this again." So basically, short oval racing is great.
Okay, let's move on to our predictor tournaments. Let's do the podium predictor tournament first of all. So it's been a bit of a crazy week in the podium predictor tournament. There is disasters for some, absolute heroics from others. So we have everybody predicted Malukas to win this week for starters, which I found really amusing. Everybody predicted Malukas to win, which I found really, really funny. Archie, not good news for you. Malukas, Pato, McLaughlin, which was identical to what our writers put. You were chopping and changing like you always do. Did that benefit you, hurt you? Not make
No, because I think I had Newgarden and Rasmussen on my initial one.
Ooh.
I initially had whatever you had, basically.
Oh gosh, that was catastrophic for you then. So you and the writers get 0. You're not the only one. Will Buxton put Malukas, O'Ward, and Pato. Will was leading this like 3 rounds ago, and now he is dead last. Like I said this other week, Will's scores recently have been absolutely catastrophic. 0 for last week, but that was still a low score. 2, which was a low score of that week. 2 the week before. 2 the week before. 0 the week before. Like, it's not gone well. So 0 for him. 1 point for the fans because it was Malukas, O'Ward, Newgarden. So 1 point for Newgarden. Tom Gamel got 2 by putting Newgarden second. So Malukas, Newgarden, Pato. I can't believe only 2 people put Rasmussen. I don't know what over races everybody else was watching.
I went against him purely because I just thought there were so many of the strong cars. I thought he'd probably get into the top 5. But I just so many of the strong cars.
But anyway, James put Malukas, Pato, Rasmussen, which earns him 3, and I put Malukas, Newgarden, Rasmussen, which earned me 5.
Yeah, that was my initial prediction, and then I think it was after practice I changed it because I'd kind of remembered Newgarden had his injury. He wasn't particularly high up the order. Pato had obviously a really good practice, and to be fair, Pato wouldn't have been a bad prediction, but he had his fuel thing happen.
Last week I was in a bit of a hole. I am now joint first in the standings.
It's brutal that because would I have had a 5-point lead?
Yeah, you had a 5-point lead and I've closed it completely.
Oh man!
So that's the turning point in this championship. James has run behind on 30, fans on 28, Tom's on 27, writers on 24, and Will on 23. So that could be the week that changes the complexion of the championship. I mean, what was funny is if you follow us on Instagram, we do like a race predictions of other Instagram pages that cover IndyCar. This is finally the week I've got accused of cheating, by the way, because
how could you possibly cheat?
It's all joking, like it's the whole like
how could you cheat though in this? This is actually an interesting point.
By race fixing people saying, "Hey, Pato, can you do me a favor? I need you to finish outside the top 10 today, buddy." No, but you have to predict the top 10, the fast 6. Biggest mover and pole. I'm typically quite good at the fast 6. I usually get 4 as we see the fast 6 predicted tournament. This week, I think I scored the highest score we've ever had of anybody because I put 4. I got 4 people bang on. So I got Rasmussen bang on, McLaughlin bang on, Kirkwood bang on, and Power bang on. And I actually stat padded by putting Rasmussen as the biggest mover. So I earned myself a ridiculous amount of points. So I am basically below in that championship. The second place is on 116. We're on 125. So we have got pretty good gap. So I'm winding everybody up a little bit, but I'm just good at predictions, clearly. If I'm so good at predictions, we'll find out what we put for the fast 6 predicted tournament. Pretty good week for me. I can't remember what we went different. We had 4 the same. We had Triple Penske and O'Ward. I had Rosenqvist and Kirkwood, and you had...
I had Power and Pato.
Ooh, it's a rough one. What kind of semi-rough? So we both got Newgarden. No, we didn't. We both got Malukas and McLaughlin. Obviously, both missed out on Newgarden Award. I got both Rosenqvist and Kirkwood, so that works out pretty well for me in the end. But you only got Pato. So
I feel like you're just gaining 1 point on me every weekend at the moment.
It feels like it's a 1 point every single week. So what's it up to now?
That was 4-3, was it?
4-3. I feel like it's been 4-3 for like the last 4 weeks.
So you're 27-23 ahead.
Ooh, that is opening up a little bit now.
Yeah, it's not ideal. It's suboptimal.
I feel like I've also got 4 for ages, but that's a lie actually. Because I got 5 at the road course because it was the closest one in history. Because I got 6 of the top 7. Anyway, let's not dwell on that. Let's do our Road America predictions now. Lock them in and see if we can. If you can close the gap, Archie. Road America, by the way, last 2 years has had 2 really funky pole sitters, and Louis Foster and Leaders Lindqvist. So, are you going for a funky pole sitter this week, or
is Foster funky again?
Yeah, I guess Foster is funky.
These are my fast 6.
Nice. I'll go for a first-time pole sitter as well in Marcus Armstrong.
Interesting. Did you go for Foster or not?
No.
Interesting. I guess we both went for Pato.
No. Yeah, of course I put Pato.
Both went for Lundgaard.
Yep.
Both went for Kirkwood.
Yep.
Both went for Malukas.
Yep. Oh
Yeah,
gosh.
both went for renewal.
No.
Okay.
I went for Award. So we got
Interesting.
Foster, Rahal versus O'Ward and Armstrong.
So I need RLS to have a good weekend, basically.
Any historical crashes between those lot? I don't think so.
No, not
Think about
particularly.
it. No, that's not too exciting. Okay, 4 the same. When was the last time we had 3 the same? That feels like decades ago.
Well, at
we
least I
would have
can
had
I
3
can
this
I
time.
can cut the gap to 2 if RLL do well. So
And I can open up the gap to 6 if
yeah.
O'Ward and
I'll push it
Armstrong
that
do.
way.
Armstrong's good at qualifying here. So
Yeah,
say
he qualified 15th last year.
15th.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't help my point very much there, but
No,
I appreciate
exactly.
it.
So
The year before, he was
the front
in
row.
that one of Lundqvist.
That was a
when it got
weird.
really
that
messy.
was weird though because it was
But that
wet,
was the
dry.
wet one. But I mean, Foster took pole last year in completely dry conditions and used reds. So
Yeah.
stranger things have happened, right? So that's obviously 2 weeks' time. Next week is a off week, so we don't quite know what we've got planned yet. We should have an episode on time next week, so stay tuned. We will obviously have Indy Next debrief from Gateway as well. It was a crazy one. Miles Rose, you probably saw one from last on the grid. We're not sure if we're going to have him on last week. He was on last week. If you haven't seen him, he kind of speaks a little bit about race going which is really insightful, and you can kind of see why he's so successful. Not sure we'll have Miles on this week, but stay tuned because Indy Next debrief will be out nonetheless, and it will be an action-packed episode as we have a lot to recap from an equally chaotic race there. But as you said, stay tuned for next week. Something will be coming your way, and you will find out in due course what it is. But for Gateway, thanks very much for watching, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.